The rain in Chicago does not wash away the grief, it just turns the ground into a muddy mess. I stood at the edge of the open grave, clutching a handful of cold, wet soil. My father was being lowered into the ground, and my heart felt like it was being buried with him. I turned to my husband Julian, waiting for him to pull me close. I needed his strength. I needed him to tell me we would get through this together. But Julian did not reach for my hand. Instead, he shoved a thick yellow envelope against my chest. The paper was dry, but his eyes were cold. "Sign it," he hissed. "Do it right now. My lawyer is waiting in the car, and I am already late for a meeting." I froze. Divorce papers. He was serving me divorce papers while my father's casket was still hovering above the ground. I looked at the man I had vowed to love forever. He was not wearing black. He was wearing a navy blue suit and the gold Rolex I bought him. He looked bored. In his mind, he was finally cutting loose the dead weight. To him, I was just Simone, the penniless archivist, the daughter of a broke pastor who died with nothing. He thought I was helpless. He thought I was alone. He thought he had the upper hand because he had a failing tech startup and I had a library card. He was so wrong. As I gripped that envelope, I did not feel tears. I felt a fire igniting in my chest. Julian had no idea that the man in that box was not just a pastor. He was a silent king, and he had just handed the keys to his kingdom to the woman he was trying to destroy. The reception was held in the small community hall attached to the church where my father had preached for 30 years. It smelled of fried chicken potato salad and the damp wool of cheap suits. I sat at the head table staring at a plate of food I had no intention of eating. The room was filled with people who loved my father, but my husband was not one of them. Julian walked in 20 minutes late. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind him, drawing the attention of the entire room. He did not come alone. Walking a step behind him was Chloe. She was 24 years old, with skin that looked like it had never known a day of stress, and she was wearing a dress that was far too tight and far too short for a funeral repast. It was black, but it was the kind of black you wear to a cocktail party, not to bury a man of God. Julian guided her through the room with a hand on the small of her back, a gesture so intimate and possessive that it made my stomach turn. He walked right up to the head table where my grieving mother and I were sitting. He did not hug me. He did not offer a hand to my mother. He simply pulled out a chair for Chloe and sat her down right next to him. "This is Chloe," he announced to the table, his voice booming unnecessarily loud. "My new executive assistant. She is here to take notes on any estate matters that need handling." A hush fell over the nearby tables. Everyone knew. You could not look at the way Chloe looked at him, or the way he leaned into her space, and believe she was taking notes on anything other than how to spend his money. But Julian did not care about optics. He cared about dominance. He was showing everyone exactly how little respect he had for me and my family. I watched Chloe pull a sleek tablet out of her designer bag. She smirked at me, a tiny, almost imperceptible lift of her lip, before tapping away on her screen, probably texting her friends about how pathetic the food was. Before I could even process the insult of her presence, Ashley, my sister-in-law, slammed her purse onto the table. Ashley was the kind of woman who believed her opinion was a gift to the world. She had married Julian's older brother 5 years ago and had spent every day since trying to prove she was the matriarch of the family. She looked at me with eyes that were cold and calculating, scanning my face for weakness. "Well, Simone," Ashley said, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the room, "I suppose this is a hard day for you, but we need to talk about reality. Now that the old man is gone, who exactly is going to foot the bill for your lifestyle?" I slowly turned my head to look at her. My father had just been buried. The dirt was still fresh on his grave, and she was talking about bills. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady despite the rage boiling in my blood. "Don't play dumb, Simone." Ashley laughed, picking up a fork and stabbing a piece of chicken. "We all know your father was helping you out. Julian has been too polite to say it, but we know a library archivist's salary does not pay for designer bags or trips to Europe, and it certainly does not pay for the maintenance on that penthouse you two live in." She chewed slowly, enjoying the moment. "Julian works hard for his money," she continued, pointing the fork at me. "He is a CEO. He is building an empire. He cannot be expected to drag dead weight forever. Now that your father is dead and his little church donations are gone, how do you plan to pay rent this month? Or did you think Julian was just going to cover you out of the goodness of his heart? I looked at Julian. He did not defend me. He did not tell his sister to shut up. He just sat there swirling the ice in his tea, looking bored. Ashley is right, Simone, he said finally, not even looking me in the eye. The startup is in a critical phase. Cash flow is tight. I cannot support a dependent right now, especially one who contributes nothing to the bottom line. A dependent. That is what I was to him. 5 years of marriage. 5 years of me silently fixing his credit score, paying off his student loans under anonymous LLC names, and funding his lifestyle through my father's accounts so his fragile ego would not shatter. And now, I was a dependent. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the yellow envelope again, the same one from the graveyard. He slapped it onto the paper tablecloth right next to a bowl of coleslaw. The sound was sharp like a gunshot. "Let us stop pretending," Julian said. His voice dropped an octave, trying to sound authoritative. "I am doing you a favor here, Simone. I know you cannot afford the penthouse on your own. I know you have nowhere to go. This marriage has been over for a long time. I need a partner who matches my ambition, not someone who shelves books for $12 an hour." He pushed the envelope toward me. "Sign the papers, Simone. Right now. Here." I looked around the room. My mother was gripping her napkin, her knuckles white, but she stayed silent just as we had practiced. My father's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was sitting in the back corner quietly sipping coffee, watching everything. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. Julian leaned forward, his face twisting into a sneer. "These are no contest divorce papers," he explained, speaking slowly as if I were a child. "It means you walk away with what is yours and I keep what is mine. No alimony, no division of assets. You keep your little library pension and your student debt. I keep the company, the car, and the future earnings." "And the apartment," Ashley chimed in. "Don't forget the apartment, Julian." "Right," Julian said. "The penthouse. The lease is in my name, Simone. I have tolerated you living there because of your father, but I am done playing the charity worker. If you do not sign these papers today, I will have the locks changed by tomorrow morning. You will be on the street with your boxes before lunch." He paused for effect, letting the threat hang in the air. Chloe let out a soft giggle, covering her mouth with her manicured hand. "Babe, do not be so harsh," Chloe whispered loud enough for me to hear. "Maybe she can stay in the guest room for a few days until she finds a shelter." Julian laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "No," he said. "She needs to learn to stand on her own 2 feet. Sign the paper, Simone. Or I swear to God I will make sure you never work in this city again. I will bury you in legal fees until that library job is not even enough to buy you a sandwich." I looked down at the document. The header read, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." It was simple. Brutal. He wanted a clean break. He wanted to discard me like a used tissue so he could upgrade to the younger model sitting next to him. He was so confident. He thought he held all the cards. He thought the penthouse was his because he signed the lease agreement I had prepared for him. He thought the car was his because I let him drive it. He thought the money he spent was generated by his failing company. He had no idea that he was sitting in a building my father owned, eating food paid for by my trust fund, threatening the woman who held the deed to his entire existence. I picked up a pen. It was a cheap blue ballpoint pen from the church office. "You are sure about this, Julian?" I asked quietly. "You want a total separation of assets. What is yours, and what is mine is mine. No take-backs." He rolled his eyes. "Just sign the damn paper, Simone. You have nothing I want." Ashley snorted. "God, she is pathetic. Just sign it so we can leave. This place smells like old people." I clicked the pen. The sound was small, but in my head it sounded like the cocking of a gun. I did not look at Ashley. I did not look at Chloe. I fixed my eyes on Julian. I wanted to memorize this moment. I wanted to remember exactly how his face looked when he thought he had won. I wanted to remember the arrogance, the cruelty, the sheer stupidity of a man digging his own grave with both hands. I pressed the pen to the paper. "Okay, Julian," I said. "If this is what you want," I signed my name. Simone Washington. The signature was clean and sharp. "There," Julian said, snatching the papers away before the ink was even dry. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. Was that so hard? He handed the papers to Chloe, who tucked them into her bag as if they were a prize. "We are leaving," Julian announced. "I have a dinner reservation at Le Monde. I need to get the smell of this place off my suit." He looked down at me one last time. "You have 24 hours to vacate the penthouse, Simone. I want you gone by noon tomorrow. Leave the keys on the counter." Ashley stood up, wiping crumbs off her dress. "Good riddance," she muttered. "Finally, we can have some class in this family." They turned and walked out. Julian, Chloe, and Ashley. They walked out of the church hall like royalty, leaving the peasants behind. I watched them go. I watched the heavy doors swing shut. My mother reached over and squeezed my hand. "Are you okay, baby?" she asked softly. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the potato salad. It was delicious. "I am better than okay, Mama," I said, taking a sip of my iced tea. I just gave him exactly what he asked for. I looked over at Mr. Henderson in the corner. He was already on his phone, probably initiating the transfer of titles. Julian wanted to be single. He wanted to be the sole owner of his life. Tomorrow at noon, when he tried to walk into the penthouse, he was going to find out exactly what that meant. He thought he had evicted me. He did not know that I was the landlord, and his eviction notice was already in the printer. The ink on the page looked blacker than the morning clothes I was supposed to be wearing. I stared at the document sitting on the plastic tablecloth next to a half-eaten bread roll. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words were sterile and cold, but they burned my eyes. The room was buzzing with the low murmur of people eating and gossiping, but for a moment, everything faded into a dull roar. All I could hear was the voice of my father. I closed my eyes for a second, and I was back in the hospital room 3 weeks ago. The smell of antiseptic and dying flowers was suffocating. My father, the great Reverend Washington, was hooked up to machines that beeped in a rhythmic countdown to the end. He had sent my mother out of the room. He had sent the nurses away. He wanted to speak to me, alone. He gripped my hand with a strength that surprised me, his calloused fingers digging into my palm. "Simone." He had wheezed, his voice sounding like dry leaves scraping together. "You have a good heart. You get that from your mother. But you have a blind spot. And his name is Julian." I had tried to protest. I had tried to tell him that Julian loved me, that he was just stressed about his business, that things would get better once the startup took off. My father had shaken his head, his eyes fierce and clear. "No, baby girl," he had said. "Wolves do not mate with sheep. They eat them. I built this empire in the shadows so you could live in the light. But as long as you are legally bound to that man, you are in danger. He does not love you. He loves what he thinks he can take from you." He had pulled me closer, his eyes locking onto mine. "Listen to me, Simone. The trust fund, the buildings, the portfolio. It is all locked behind a specific clause. I wrote it that way to protect you. You cannot access the kingdom while you are married to a peasant who thinks he is a king. You are only safe when you are single. You are only safe when you are single." The words echoed in my head as I opened my eyes and looked back at Julian. He was checking his watch again, tapping his foot impatiently. He looked so polished on the outside. The perfect suit, the perfect haircut, the perfect grieving son-in-law. But inside, he was rotting. He was desperate. I looked down at the papers again, reading the fine print that he thought I was too stupid or too emotional to understand. I had a degree in archival science. My job was literally to pay attention to details, to preserve history, to spot the difference between a fake and an original. Julian thought I was just a librarian. He forgot that librarians know how to read between the lines. Clause 4, Section A, regarding marital assets. I ran my finger over the line. The husband shall retain sole ownership of the 2022 Tesla Model S, and the wife shall retain ownership of the 2011 Honda Civic. I almost laughed out loud. I bought that Tesla. I put the down payment on it using a bonus check I told him was a tax refund. I made the monthly payments from my personal account, which he treated like a community chest. He drove it to meet investors to look successful. He drove it to pick up Chloe for lunch dates. And now he was claiming it as his sole property, leaving me with the car I had driven since college. Clause 5, Section B, regarding savings and investments. The parties agree that the joint savings account ending in 4490 shall remain the sole property of the husband to cover business liabilities incurred during the marriage. I felt a flash of heat rise up my neck. That account had $40,000 in it. It was my emergency fund. It was money I had scraped together by picking up extra shifts cataloging dusty city records on weekends. Julian had not contributed a dime to it in 2 years. In fact, he had drained it twice to pay for office furniture he did not need. Now he was stealing the rest of it, claiming it was for business liabilities. Clause 9, Section C, regarding debts and liabilities. The husband hereby waives any and all claims to the estate of Reverend Marcus Washington, including any debts, liabilities, or loans associated with said estate. The wife shall assume full responsibility for any insolvency related to her late father. This was the masterpiece. This was the trap he thought he was springing on me. Julian thought my father died broke. He thought the church was underwater. He thought the mortgage on our parents' house was delinquent. He put this clause in here to protect himself. He thought he was being smart, dodging a bullet. He was terrified that if he stayed married to me, he would inherit my father's debt. He was waiving his claim. He was voluntarily signing away his right to any part of my father's estate because he thought it was worthless. He was running away from a gold mine because he thought it was a sinkhole. I looked up at him. He was whispering something to Chloe, who was giggling and covering her mouth. They looked like 2 teenagers skipping class, not 2 adults at a funeral repast. "You really thought of everything, didn't you, Julian?" I said quietly. He turned back to me, his expression shifting instantly from amusement to annoyance. "I told you, Simone. I am trying to make this easy for you. I am taking on the burden of the company and the car payments. You cannot afford them anyway. I am letting you walk away clean. You do not have to worry about my business debts, and I do not have to worry about your father's mess. It is a fair trade, a fair trade." He was stealing my car, stealing my savings, and kicking me out of my home, and he called it a fair trade. Ashley leaned over her breath, smelling of sweet tea and malice. "Just sign it, Simone. Stop dragging this out. We all know you are going to end up moving back in with your mom anyway. At least this way you do not drag Julian down with you. He has a future. You have memories." My mother was sitting to my left. She had not said a word since Julian walked in. She was a woman of few words, but she had eyes that missed nothing. She knew about the will. She knew about the portfolio. She and my father had built it together brick by brick, dollar by dollar, silently buying up blocks of the city while everyone else was buying fancy cars. She looked at the papers, then she looked at me. She gave a microscopic nod, a signal. "Do it." I picked up the pen again. The plastic barrel felt warm in my hand. This was not a surrender. This was an execution. I was not signing away my life. I was signing his death warrant. I looked at Clause 9 again, the waiver, the beautiful ironclad waiver where Julian voluntarily rejected any claim to my inheritance. If he knew. If he had any idea that the mess he was running from was actually $100 million empire, he would be on his knees begging me to stay. He would be kissing my feet instead of Chloe's neck. But he did not know. Because he never looked at me. He never saw me. He only saw what I could do for him. He saw a cook. He saw a maid. He saw a bank account to drain. He never saw the woman who managed the books for the biggest commercial real estate portfolio in Chicago. I pressed the tip of the pen to the paper. The ink flowed smoothly. Simone. I wrote my first name, the name my father gave me. Washington. I wrote my last name, the name that owned the building we were sitting in, the name that owned the building Julian leased for his failing startup. I did not write his last name. I was done with it. I was done with him. I sat back and pushed the papers across the table. There I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "It is done. You are free, Julian." He snatched the papers up, scanning the signature to make sure I had not pulled any tricks. A grin spread across his face, a smile so wide and genuine, it made him look almost handsome again. It was the smile of a man who thought he had just pulled off the heist of the century. Finally, he breathed out, letting his shoulders drop. "You did the right thing, Simone. I know it hurts now, but one day you will thank me. You were never cut out for my world. This is better for everyone." He stood up, tucking the papers into the inside pocket of his jacket right next to his heart. He buttoned his suit, turning to Chloe. "Ready to go, babe?" he asked, extending his hand to her. Chloe hopped up, smoothing down her short dress. Totally, she said, popping her gum. This place is depressing. Julian looked at my mother, who was still staring at her plate. Mrs. Washington, he said, giving a curt nod. Sorry for your loss. If you need help moving things out of the house, let me know. I can send some of my interns over. They need the volunteer hours. My mother slowly raised her head. She looked at him with a gaze so withering, it would have turned a lesser man to stone. Get out of my church, Julian, she said softly, before God strikes you down right where you stand. Julian laughed a dry, nervous sound. He patted his pocket, reassuring himself that he had what he wanted. Goodbye, Simone, he said, not even looking at me. Good luck with the library. He put his hand on Chloe's waist, pulling her close. Then right there, in front of the pastor's widow, in front of the grieving congregation, in front of the wife he had just divorced, he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a peck. It was deep and wet and performative. He was marking his territory. He was showing everyone that he had moved on, that I was history. Ashley stood up, grabbing her purse. I will walk you out, she said, beaming at her brother. I am so proud of you, Julian. You finally cut the anchor loose. They turned and walked away. I watched their backs as they headed for the double doors. Julian walked with a bounce in his step. He thought he was walking toward freedom. He thought he was walking toward a new life with his young girlfriend and his startup and my money. He did not know he was walking off a cliff. The heavy doors slammed shut behind them, echoing through the silent hall. The sound was final. It was the period at the end of a terrible sentence. The room was quiet. People were looking at me with pity. They saw a woman who had just lost her father and her husband in the same week. They saw a victim. I slowly picked up my napkin and dabbed at the corners of my mouth. I was not crying. My eyes were dry. My heart was beating slow and steady. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. It was an old model one that Julian had made fun of constantly. He was always telling me to upgrade to get with the times. I unlocked the screen and scrolled past the endless missed calls from bill collectors that belonged to him. I found the number I needed. It was saved under a contact name that would have meant nothing to Julian, but meant everything to me. The architect. I pressed call. I brought the phone to my ear, watching the closed doors where my ex-husband had just vanished. Mr. Henderson answered on the first ring. His voice was gravelly and professional. Ms. Washington, he said, I assume the funeral is over. It is, I said, my voice strong and clear. The mourning period is officially over, Mr. Henderson. And the papers, he asked. Signed, I replied. He took the bait. He waived all claims to the estate. He thinks he stripped me bare. I heard the rustle of papers on the other end of the line. Excellent, Mr. Henderson said. I have the files ready. The transfer of the deeds can be executed immediately. The eviction notices are already drafted. We were just waiting for your confirmation. I looked at my mother. She had finally started to eat her potato salad, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. She raised her glass of iced tea to me in a silent toast. I took a deep breath. The air in the room suddenly didn't smell like stale flowers anymore. It smelled like ozone. It smelled like a storm coming. Execute it, I said. Execute what exactly? Ms. Washington, Mr. Henderson asked, though I could hear the smile in his voice. Activate Protocol 4, I said. Freeze his access to the building. Cancel the lease. And Mr. Henderson, send the courier to the courthouse. I want that divorce decree filed before he even finishes his appetizer. I hung up the phone. I stood up and smoothed out the wrinkles in my black dress. I was not Simone the librarian anymore. I was not Simone the pastor's daughter. I was Simone Washington, owner of the Washington Legacy Group, and I had some trash to take out. Dawes. The morning sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, but it brought no warmth. It was 9 o'clock in the morning, less than 24 hours since I had stood over my father's grave and watched my marriage disintegrate. I was standing in the middle of the living room, holding a cardboard box I had brought from the library. I had not slept. I had spent the night walking the halls of this apartment, running my hands over the walls and the furniture. Julian thought this was his home. He walked around these rooms like he was the king of the castle. He had no idea that every beam, every fixture, and every square inch of marble flooring belonged to the Washington Legacy Trust. He was a squatter in a palace built by the man he despised. I was folding a sweater when the front door chimed. I expected Julian. I expected him to come back and gloat to oversee my departure personally. But when the heavy door swung open, it was not my ex-husband. It was Ashley. And standing behind her, looking like a reluctant bodyguard, was Marcus Julian's older brother. Ashley strode into the apartment like she owned the place. She was wearing oversized sunglasses indoors and holding a venti latte. She stopped in the foyer and wrinkled her nose as if she smelled something rotting. "You are still here," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Julian said you would be gone by noon. It is 9:15. You are burning daylight, Simone." I did not look up from the box. "I am packing, Ashley," I said calmly. "It takes time to move 5 years of a life." Ashley laughed a sharp barking sound. She walked over to the sofa and kicked my cardboard box with the toe of her boot. "5 years of a lie, you mean? And do not worry about packing. We are here to help speed things up. Julian wants the place fumigated before Chloe moves in. He does not want any bad energy lingering around." She snapped her fingers at Marcus. "Get the bag," she ordered. Marcus sighed and pulled a roll of heavy-duty black garbage bags from his jacket pocket. He looked at me with a flicker of shame in his eyes, but he was a weak man. He had spent his whole life being bullied by his wife and his younger brother. He would not stand up for me today. "What are those for?" I asked, my voice dropping. Ashley snatched a bag from him and shook it open with a loud snap. "Efficiency," she said, smiling. "We are not moving you, Simone. We are evicting you, and evictions happen in trash bags." She marched into the master bedroom. My stomach turned. That was my sanctuary. That was where I kept the few things that truly mattered to me. I followed her just in time to see her open my closet door. She looked at my clothes, the modest cardigans I wore to the library, the professional slacks, the comfortable dresses. She grabbed a handful of hangers and yanked them off the rack. "Trash," she muttered, tossing them onto the floor. "Boring, ugly, cheap." She started stuffing my clothes into the black plastic bag. She did not fold them. She balled them up, treating my belongings like refuse. These were clothes I had bought with my own money, clothes I had worn to church with my father, clothes I had worn on dates with Julian when we were first dating and he was pretending to be a good man. "Stop it," I said, stepping forward. "I can pack my own things." Ashley spun around, holding up a silk blouse I had bought for my anniversary. "You are too slow," she spat. "Julian wants this place cleared. He has a truck coming at 11 to bring in Chloe's things. Real clothes, designer pieces, not this Goodwill collection." She shoved the blouse into the bag so hard I heard a seam rip. Marcus was in the bathroom clearing out the medicine cabinet. I heard the sound of glass bottles hitting the bottom of a trash can. My face creams. My prescription for migraines. The perfume my mother gave me for Christmas. All of it being discarded like it was contaminated. I stood there trembling, not from fear, but from a rage so hot, it felt like it was melting my bones. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them that they were standing in my building. I wanted to tell them that the security guards downstairs worked for me. I wanted to tell them that I could have them arrested for trespassing in a heartbeat. But I couldn't. Not yet. The trap had to be perfect. They had to believe they had won completely, so that when the floor fell out from under them, the fall would be fatal. I watched Ashley move to the shoe rack. She paused. Her eyes lit up. At the very back of the closet on the top shelf sat a pair of shoes that did not fit with the rest of my wardrobe. They were Christian Louboutins, custom made with Swarovski crystals embedded in the red soles. My father had bought them for me for my 25th birthday. He had told me that a queen should always walk on stars. I had only worn them once. I was saving them for a special occasion. Ashley reached up and grabbed them. Her greedy fingers left smudges on the pristine patent leather. "Well, well, well," she purred, turning the shoes over in her hands. "Look at this. I guess the little librarian had a secret stash. Where did you get these, Simone? Did you steal them from a donation bin in a rich neighborhood? Put them down, Ashley." I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Those were a gift from my father." Ashley ignored me. She kicked off her own cheap heels and slipped her feet into my Louboutins. They were a size too small for her. I watched her jam her wide feet into the delicate structure stretching the leather. She wobbled a bit, then strutted to the full-length mirror, admiring herself. "They look better on me," she declared, posing. "They actually fit someone with style. You probably just looked at them." "Take them off," I said, taking a step closer. "They are not yours." Ashley laughed, looking at me through the mirror. "Consider them a cleaning fee," she said. "You did not pay rent this month, Simone. You owe Julian. And since you have no money, these will have to do as interest. Besides, Chloe might want them. She has small feet like you. But I think I will keep them. I deserve a treat for dealing with your drama." She walked back to her own shoes, picked them up, and tossed them into the trash bag with my clothes. She kept my Louboutins on. She was stealing my property right in front of my face and daring me to do something about it. I memorized the image. Ashley, standing in my bedroom wearing my dead father's gift, stretching the leather, ruining the shape. I added it to the ledger in my mind. The debt they were racking up was getting astronomical. "Fine," I said, "keep them." Ashley looked disappointed. She wanted a fight. She wanted me to cry and beg. Whatever she muttered, bored now that I had surrendered. She turned back to the closet and swept the rest of my clothes into the bag. Within 20 minutes, my entire life was stuffed into 4 black plastic bags. They sat by the front door looking like garbage waiting for pickup. Marcus carried them out into the hallway. He did not look at me. "Here is the deal," Ashley said, walking to the door. Her gait was awkward in the tight shoes, but she forced herself to walk through the pain just to spite me. "You hand over the key fob, you walk out, and you never come back. If Julian sees you in this lobby again, he will file a restraining order." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the plastic key fob. It was just a piece of plastic. It gave access to the elevator and the front door. But what she did not know was that as the owner, I had a master code. I did not need a fob to enter my own building. I dropped the fob into her outstretched hand. "Tell Julian I said that I hope he enjoys the apartment. I hope it is everything he deserves." Ashley closed her fingers around the fob tight. "Oh, he will," she smirked. "He finally has a woman who knows how to appreciate luxury. Goodbye, Simone. Try not to look so homeless on your way out. It brings down the property value." She slammed the door in my face. I stood in the hallway next to my garbage bags. The silence of the corridor was deafening. I stared at the door, my door, the door I had paid for, the door that protected the man who had betrayed me. I reached for my phone. I needed to call a car. I needed to get these bags to the hotel where I was staying. I dialed Julian's number first, just to have one last confirmation of his cruelty. One ring, then a click. "The number you have reached is not accepting calls from this number. Blocked." He had blocked me. After 5 years of marriage, after everything I had done for him, he had erased me from his digital life the moment I walked out the door. I looked at the smart lock on the door. It was a high-tech model with a keypad. I knew Julian. He was predictable. He was arrogant. He would have changed the code immediately, probably to something related to Chloe. Her birthday, maybe, or the date they met. But as I stood there, I saw the small red light on the lock blink. Then I heard the mechanical whir of the deadbolt sliding home. He had activated the lockdown mode remotely. He was probably watching me right now through the doorbell camera, laughing as I stood there with my trash bags. I looked up at the camera lens. It was a small black eye staring back at me. I knew he was on the other side of that feed. I straightened my back. I smoothed down my shirt. I did not cry. I did not kick the door. I simply looked directly into the lens, into his eyes, wherever he was. I lifted my chin. I channeled every ounce of my father's dignity. And then I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator who has just seen the trap snap shut. I picked up my bags. They were heavy, but I carried them. I walked to the elevator, my head held high. Ashley had my shoes. Julian had my apartment. But I had the deed. As the elevator doors closed, shutting out the sight of my former home, I checked the time on my phone. 9:45. Mr. Henderson would be filing the paperwork at the courthouse in 15 minutes. Julian thought he had just evicted me. He thought he had thrown me out like trash. He did not know that in 15 minutes, the ownership of the building would officially transfer from the Washington estate to the Simone Washington Revocable Trust. And the first order of business for the new owner was going to be a comprehensive audit of all tenant leases, especially the tenants in Penthouse B. I watched the floor numbers count down. 10, 9, 8. Enjoy the shoes, Ashley, I whispered to the empty elevator, because you are going to need comfortable shoes for the walk of shame you have coming. The elevator dinged at the lobby. I walked out past the doorman, who nodded respectfully at me. He knew. Everyone who actually mattered in this building knew. I walked out into the bright morning sun. I hailed a cab. The driver looked at my trash bags and then at me. "Rough morning?" he asked. I looked back up at the penthouse balcony towering against the blue sky. "No," I said, sliding into the back seat. "Best morning of my life." I just took out the trash. The automatic glass doors of the Nexus Tower slid open with a soft hiss. I stepped into the lobby, and the blast of air conditioning hit me instantly, drying the sweat on the back of my neck. It was noon on a Tuesday. The lobby was bustling with the lunch rush. Tech workers in hoodies and overpriced sneakers were swiping their badges, heading out to grab sushi or quinoa bowls. I knew this building better than the architects who designed it. I knew that the elevator in the far corner was 10 seconds faster than the others. I knew that the marble in the foyer was imported from Italy because my father had personally selected the slab. And I knew that the company occupying the entire 14th floor was currently insolvent. I walked toward the reception desk. I was not there to cause a scene. I was not there to beg. I had left a small box in the back office of Julian's startup. It contained things that had no monetary value but meant the world to me. A framed photo of my father holding me when I was 5, my grandmother's Bible, and a small notebook where I had sketched out the original business plan for Julian's company. The business plan he claimed he wrote. The business plan that investors threw millions of dollars at. I just wanted my history back. The receptionist was a new girl. She looked barely out of college with bright pink fingernails and a headset that looked too big for her head. She looked up as I approached, and her smile faltered. She knew who I was. Or rather, she knew who I used to be. The boss's wife. The woman who brought homemade cookies on Fridays. The woman who was now persona non grata. "I am just here to pick up a box from my old desk," I said, my voice calm. She bit her lip, looking nervous. She glanced toward the elevators. Mrs. Wash, Ms. Simone, I do not think that is a good idea. Mr. Julian gave us strict instructions." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the cool granite of the desk. "I am not going up there," I said. "Just call someone to bring it down. It is a small cardboard box. It is sitting on the filing cabinet in the break room." She reached for the phone, her hand trembling slightly. Before she could dial, the elevator doors chimed. A group of people spilled out, laughing and talking loud. And in the center of the group, like a king holding court, was Julian. He was wearing a fresh suit different from the one at the funeral. He looked energized. He looked like a man who had just shed a heavy skin. Hanging on his arm like a decorative accessory was Chloe. She was holding a selfie stick, her phone positioned at a high angle to capture her best side. Julian stopped dead when he saw me. The laughter died in his throat. The group of employees around him fell silent. They looked from him to me, sensing the tension. "What are you doing here?" Julian asked. His voice was not loud yet, but it carried across the quiet lobby. "I came for my things, Julian," I said, standing my ground. "The photo of my dad. My Bible. You threw my clothes in trash bags, but you forgot the things in the office." Julian laughed. It was a performance. He looked around at his employees, making sure he had an audience. "Your things," he repeated. "Simone, you do not have things here. This is a place of business. This is a tech company. We create the future here. We do not store old relics for ex-wives who cannot move on." He walked over to the security desk. The guard on duty was a man named Ray. Ray had worked in this building for 20 years. He knew my father. He knew me. He had been at my wedding. I saw Ray stiffen as Julian approached him, but he stayed professional. "Ray," Julian said, his voice rising, "why is this unauthorized person in my lobby?" Ray looked at me. His eyes were apologetic. He started to speak, but Julian cut him off. "Actually," Julian said, turning back to the crowd, "let us make this official." He reached over the reception desk and grabbed the microphone for the building-wide PA system. The receptionist shrank back, terrified. Julian clicked the button. A sharp feedback whine cut through the air, making everyone wince. Attention! Attention, everyone in the lobby and on the 14th floor. His voice boomed from the speakers, echoing off the marble walls. It was distorted and metallic, but the arrogance came through clearly. This is your CEO speaking. The woman standing at the front desk. Simone Washington is no longer associated with this company. She is no longer associated with me. I stood there frozen. I felt the eyes of strangers burning into my back. Delivery guys, couriers, interns, everyone stopped what they were doing to watch the show. She is considered a security risk. Julian continued, enjoying the sound of his own voice. She is desperate and she is bitter. If you see her on the premises, you are to call security immediately. Do not let her into the elevators. Do not speak to her. If anyone lets her up to the office, they will be terminated immediately. This is a zero-tolerance policy. He dropped the microphone back onto the desk. The loud thud echoed like a gavel striking a block. He turned to me, a smug grin plastered on his face. There, he said. Is that clear enough for you, Simone? You are banned. You are a trespasser. Now get out before I have Ray drag you out. I felt a heat rising in my cheeks, not from shame, but from the sheer audacity of it. He was banning me from my own building. He was calling me a security risk in a structure that my family built to withstand earthquakes. But before I could speak, I saw a movement to my left. Chloe. She had moved closer, the selfie stick extended. The red light on her phone screen was blinking. She was live. Oh my God, you guys, she chirped, her voice high and fake. You are not going to believe who is crashing the office right now. It is the ex. She shoved the phone into my face. I could see the comments scrolling up the screen at lightning speed. Is that her? The one he dumped? She looks old. Why is she so desperate? Run, girl, have some dignity. Chloe laughed, reading the comments out loud. Someone said you look like you need a GoFundMe. Simone, she mocked. Seriously though, why are you here? Are you trying to get money? Julian already told you the bank is closed, honey. She circled me like a shark with a camera. Look at her, she narrated to her invisible audience. She shows up the day after the funeral trying to guilt trip him. This is what toxic looks like, guys. We are literally just trying to work and build an empire, and she is here begging for attention. She turned the camera back to herself, making a sad, pouty face. It is honestly so sad. I almost feel bad for her. Almost. But then I remember she tried to trap him for 5 years. Julian walked over and wrapped his arm around Chloe's waist, pulling her into the frame. Babe, do not waste your battery on her, he said, looking directly into the lens. She is the past. We are the future. He looked at me over the top of the phone. Ray, he barked, remove her, now. Ray stepped out from behind the podium. He was a big man, a former linebacker. He walked toward me slowly. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He hated this. He wanted to grab Julian by his expensive lapels and throw him out into the street, but he had a job to do. And right now on paper, Julian was the tenant, and I was just a visitor. I looked Ray in the eye. I gave him a tiny shake of my head. A silent command, do not blow my cover. Not yet. I understand, Ray, I said softly, so only he could hear. Do your job. Ray put a gentle hand on my elbow. Ms. Simone, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I pulled my arm away gently. I can walk, Ray. I know the way out. I turned to look at Julian one last time. He was high-fiving a couple of his bros from the sales department. They were laughing. They thought they had just defended their fortress. They thought they were powerful. And Chloe. She was still filming, zooming in on my retreating figure. And she is walking away, folks, Chloe announced. The walk of shame. Bye, Simone. Do not come back. I walked toward the revolving doors. My heels clicked rhythmically on the floor. Click, 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 like the ticking of a clock. I did not look back. I did not scream. I did not tell them that the security risk they just banned was the only reason the electricity was still on in the building. I did not tell them that the empire they were building was squatting on land they did not own. I walked out into the heat of the city. My heart was pounding, but my mind was crystal clear. Julian wanted a show. He wanted a public execution. He wanted to strip me of my dignity in front of his staff and the entire internet. He succeeded. But as I stood on the sidewalk watching the busy street, I pulled out my phone. I opened the banking app for the Washington Legacy Trust. I saw the transaction history. The rent payment from Julian's company was due in 3 days. I tapped the screen. I opened the file marked Lease Agreements, Nexus Tower, Floor 14. I scrolled to the section on Code of Conduct. Clause 17, tenant agrees to maintain a professional environment. Any public harassment, defamation, or disorderly conduct on the premises by the tenant or their guests is grounds for immediate lease termination. I smiled. He had just broadcasted his violation of the lease to thousands of people. Chloe had recorded the evidence in 4K resolution and uploaded it to the cloud for me. I did not need my old Bible or the photo of my dad. I had something better. I had the smoking gun. I hailed a cab. The driver pulled up and I slid into the back seat. "Where to, lady?" he asked. I looked at the Nexus Tower one last time. I looked at the 14th floor where Julian was probably popping champagne and celebrating his victory. "Take me to the lawyer's office," I said. "I have a video I need to submit into evidence." Julian thought he had humiliated me. He thought he had shamed me, but all he had done was hand me the hammer, and I was about to bring it down. I sat on the edge of the king-sized bed in the Ritz-Carlton suite, watching the city lights of Chicago flicker on through the twilight. The room smelled of fresh linen and expensive orchid arrangements. It was a stark contrast to the garbage bags sitting in the corner, the same bags Ashley had stuffed my life into just hours ago. I had checked in under my middle name using the corporate black card issued by the trust. To the hotel staff, I was a VIP guest. To the rest of the world, and specifically to my ex-husband, I was a homeless woman with a negative net worth. My stomach growled. I had not eaten since the funeral repast, where I signed my marriage away. I picked up the room service menu. A lobster bisque and a glass of Sancerre sounded perfect. I reached for the bedside phone to place the order, but then I paused. I decided to use the app on my personal phone instead. I wanted to keep my personal life separate from the trust business for just a few more hours. I wanted to buy a bowl of soup with my own money, the money I had earned filing papers in the basement of the library. It was a small act of independence. I placed the order. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a notification. Payment declined. I frowned. That was impossible. I knew exactly how much was in my personal checking account. $214.50. The soup and wine came to $80. I opened my banking app. The screen loaded slowly, the spinning wheel mocking me. When the dashboard finally appeared, the numbers were there, but they were grayed out. Beside my balance was a red lock icon and a notification in bold letters. Account frozen. Court order case number 4492B. My heart skipped a beat. Not out of fear, but out of sheer confusion. Who would freeze an account with $200 in it? Then my phone rang. The screen lit up with a name I had deleted but recognized instantly. Lawyer Steinberg. This was Julian's divorce attorney, a man who charged $600 an hour to help mediocre men destroy their wives. I answered the phone, my voice calm and steady. "Hello? Ms. Washington. Mr. Steinberg said, his voice oily and patronizing. Or should I say Mrs. Vance, since the divorce decree has not been fully processed by the clerk yet. I am calling to inform you that we have successfully filed an emergency motion to freeze your personal assets. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. My assets, Mr. Steinberg. You mean the $200 I have to buy food? You spent more on the filing fee than what is in the account. Mr. Steinberg cleared his throat. We are not interested in your petty cash, Ms. Washington. We are interested in the undisclosed asset you failed to declare on your financial affidavit. We have uncovered evidence of a life insurance policy, a policy in the amount of $50,000 issued by State Farm naming you as the sole beneficiary upon the death of your father. I closed my eyes. The policy. I had forgotten about it. My father had taken it out when I was a baby, paying $10 a month for 30 years. It was a tiny policy meant to cover funeral costs if he died young. He had never canceled it even after he became a multimillionaire because he was a man of habit. $50,000, Mr. Steinberg, I repeated. That is what this is about. It is a marital asset, he replied sharply. The premiums were paid during the course of your marriage. Therefore, Julian is entitled to his share. Furthermore, given the deception involved in hiding this asset, my client is seeking the full amount as punitive damages. Deception. They called it deception. I was sitting on a $100 million real estate portfolio, and they were hunting me down for a $50,000 insurance check. "Put him on," I said. "Excuse me?" Mr. Steinberg asked. "Put Julian on the phone. I know he is sitting right next to you listening on speaker. I can hear him breathing." There was a pause, then a shuffling sound. "Hello, Simone?" Julian's voice came through the line, smooth and arrogant. He sounded like a man who had just won the lottery. "You really thought you could hide money from me?" Julian asked. "You thought I would not find out about the insurance payout. $50,000. That is a lot of money for a librarian, Simone." I walked over to the window, looking down at the streets below. "It is funeral money, Julian," I said quietly. "It was meant to bury my father." "Your father is already buried," Julian countered, his voice devoid of empathy. "And from what I saw at the church, the collection plate covered the costs. That $50,000 is profit, Simone, and it is profit you made while we were married." I leaned my forehead against the cool glass. "So you want it, all of it." "I deserve it, Simone," he said, his voice rising with indignation. "Do you have any idea what you put me through? 5 years, Simone. 5 years I waited for your father to help us. 5 years I waited for you to step up and be the wife of a CEO. Instead, you dragged me down. You wore cheap clothes. You drove a cheap car. You embarrassed me in front of investors." He paused, taking a breath. "I gave you my youth, Simone. I gave you my prime years. I could have been with anyone. I could have been with a woman like Chloe years ago, someone who understands high society. Instead, I stuck it out with you out of pity. That $50,000 is not just money, it is compensation. It is restitution for the time I wasted on a dead-end marriage. I listened to him rewrite history. He forgot about the nights I stayed up helping him write code because he was too drunk to focus. He forgot about the loans I took out in my name to pay his payroll when his startup was failing. He forgot that the only reason he had high society status was because I introduced him to my father's connections. And now, he wanted my father's death benefit as restitution for tolerating me. "You froze my bank account, Julian," I said, changing the subject. "You know that is my only money. You know I have nowhere to go." "That is the point, Simone," he said, his tone dropping to a sinister whisper. "I know you are at a breaking point. I know you are probably sitting on a park bench right now wondering where you are going to sleep. I am doing this to teach you a lesson." "A lesson?" I asked. "Reality," he said. "This is the real world, Simone. In the real world, you need money to survive, and you have none. I have the company, I have the penthouse, and soon I will have that insurance check." He let out a sigh, a sound of mock sympathy. "But I am not a monster. I know you are struggling. So here is my offer. You sign over the full rights to the insurance policy immediately. No fighting, no delays. You tell Steinberg right now that you agree to release the funds to me. If you do that, I will unfreeze your bank account. You can have your $200 back. You can buy yourself a bus ticket to wherever you came from." I stood there in the silence of the luxury suite processing his offer. He was holding my $200 hostage to extort $50,000. He truly believed he had me cornered. He thought I was destitute. He thought I was starving. And the irony was so rich, I could taste it. The dinner I was about to order cost more than the entire balance of the account he had frozen. The suite I was standing in cost more per night than the monthly rent he was struggling to pay. He was fighting over crumbs while I owned the bakery. "Simone, are you there?" Julian asked, impatient now. "Do not be stupid. You need cash. You cannot fight me in court. Steinberg will bury you in legal fees until you are begging for mercy. Just give me the insurance money and walk away. It is the only way you survive this." I gripped the phone tighter. A part of me wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that $50,000 was a rounding error in my quarterly tax returns. I wanted to tell him that he was suing the wrong woman. But my father's voice echoed in my head. "Never interrupt an enemy when he is making a mistake." Julian was digging. He was digging so deep and so fast that he didn't realize he was standing in quicksand. Every legal motion he filed, every greedy demand he made, was creating a paper trail of malice. He was proving to the court and to the world that he was financially abusive. If I revealed my hand now, he might back off. He might try to settle. But if I let him think he was winning, if I let him think he was crushing me, he would go too far. He would commit fraud. He would lie under oath. He would ensure his own destruction. I forced my voice to tremble. I forced myself to sound small and defeated. I need time, Julian, I stammered. I need to think. You do not have time, he snapped. You have 24 hours. If I do not have that signature by tomorrow noon, I am filing for damages. I will take the car. I will take your library pension. I will leave you with absolutely nothing. The line went dead. He hung up. He wanted to leave me in terror. He wanted me to spend the night sweating and crying, staring at a bleak future. I lowered the phone from my ear. I looked at the black screen. Then I walked over to the desk and picked up the hotel room phone. I dialed room service. Good evening, Ms. Washington, the concierge answered cheerfully. I would like the lobster bisque. I said, my voice strong and clear. And send up a bottle of Dom Perignon instead of the Sancerre. I have something to celebrate. To celebrate, Madame the concierge asked politely. Yes, I said, looking at my reflection in the window. I just found out exactly how much my ex-husband is worth, and it turns out he is cheap. I hung up the phone. Then I called Mr. Henderson. He answered on the second ring. Simone, is everything all right? He asked, concern in his voice. We received a notification about a frozen asset. It is fine, Mr. Henderson, I said, walking back to the window. It is just a distraction. Julian found the State Farm policy. He is trying to leverage my checking account to get it. I can have that freeze lifted in an hour, Mr. Henderson said, his tone turning icy. This is a frivolous motion. It is harassment. No, I said, stopping him. Let him keep it frozen. There was a silence on the line. I do not understand, Simone. Why would you want your account frozen? Because he thinks it is my lifeline, I explained. He thinks he has cut off my oxygen. If he thinks I am desperate, he will get careless. He will stop looking for the real assets. Let him fight for the $50,000, Mr. Henderson. Let him spend $10,000 in legal fees to chase it. I want him to feel like he is winning right up until the moment he loses everything. Mr. Henderson chuckled, a low rumble of approval. You are your father's daughter, Simone. Very well. We will ignore the motion. We will let him think you are panicked. But what about the insurance check? Draft a document, I said. Prepare to transfer the $50,000 to him. Simone, Mr. Henderson warned. That is your money. It is bait, I corrected him. I will dangle it in front of him. I will make him work for it. And while he is busy staring at that check, we will be finalizing the eviction on the commercial lease for his company. How is that coming along? It is ready, Mr. Henderson said. The process server is scheduled to visit his office tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Perfect, I said. He gave me a deadline of noon tomorrow to sign over the insurance. I think it is only fair that I give him a surprise at 10. I looked out at the city again. Somewhere out there in the penthouse I paid for Julian was probably pouring a drink for Chloe, bragging about how he had crushed me. He was celebrating a victory that existed only in his imagination. He had taken my $200. He had demanded my $50,000. But tomorrow he was going to lose his company. And the best part was he would not even see it coming, because he was too busy looking down at me to look up at the avalanche heading his way. The doorbell rang. Room service. I walked to the door. Keep the change, I told the waiter, signing the bill to the room. I sat down to eat my lobster bisque. It tasted like freedom. Julian wanted me to beg. He wanted me to crawl. But I was done crawling. Tomorrow, the librarian was going to teach the CEO a lesson in economics. Lesson 1. Never mistreat the person who holds the mortgage. Julian thinks I am sleeping on a park bench tonight. He probably imagines me curled up under a newspaper, clutching my purse and crying over the life I lost. The thought probably makes him sleep like a baby. He loves the idea of me suffering because in his mind my suffering validates his success. If I am down, it means he is up. If I am poor, it means he is rich. But while Julian was busy fantasizing about my demise, I was stepping out of a hot stone massage at the Ritz-Carlton. I wrapped myself in a plush white robe that cost more than the suit he wore to my father's funeral. I walked over to the minibar and popped open a bottle of sparkling water. The room was silent. No booming television, no complaints about the electric bill. No condescending lectures about how I needed to be more supportive of his dreams. Just silence and the view of the Chicago skyline. Checking in had been the first test of my new reality. When I walked up to the reception desk with my trash bags of clothes, the young woman behind the counter had looked at me with polite skepticism. I did not look like their usual clientele. I looked like a woman who had been through a war. My hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and my eyes were red-rimmed, not from crying, but from the sheer exhaustion of holding back my rage. "Do you have a reservation, madame?" she had asked, her hand hovering over the security button. I placed a card on the marble counter. It was not the joint debit card Julian and I shared, the one that declined if we bought 2 coffees in the same day. It was a heavy black card made of anodized titanium. The American Express Centurion card, the black card. It was issued to the Washington Legacy Trust, and it had my name embossed on it in silver letters. The receptionist's eyes widened. She recognized the weight of the metal against the marble. The skepticism vanished instantly, replaced by a flurry of professional panic. "Ms. Washington," she stammered, typing furiously. "My apologies. We have the presidential suite prepared for you. Would you like champagne sent up?" I told her no. I told her I just wanted peace. Now, standing in the suite, looking down at the city, I finally allowed myself to think about the man who gave me this card. My father, Reverend Marcus Washington. To the world, he was a humble shepherd. He wore off-the-rack suits and drove a 10-year-old Buick. He preached about humility and stewardship. He lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in a working-class neighborhood. But that was the mask. My father was not just a man of God, he was a man of business. He had a brilliant mind for numbers that he hid under his Bible. In the late 90s, when the real estate market in Chicago crashed and everyone was selling in a panic, my father was buying. He bought dilapidated warehouses in the meatpacking district. He bought abandoned office buildings in the Loop. He bought crumbling brownstones in neighborhoods that banks had redlined. He bought them for pennies on the dollar using the small savings from the church's community fund, which he then paid back with massive interest. He saw value where others saw ruin. He held on to those properties for 20 years. He renovated them quietly. He restored them. And as the city gentrified, as the tech companies and the coffee shops moved in, my father's portfolio exploded in value. But he never changed his lifestyle. He never moved out of the neighborhood. He drilled it into me from the time I was old enough to count. "Simone," he would say, sitting at our scratched kitchen table with blueprints spread out over dinner, "money is like a weapon. If you flash it around, you become a target. If you keep it hidden, you stay safe. You only pull it out when you are ready to shoot." He taught me everything. He taught me how to read a commercial lease. He taught me how to spot a shell company. He taught me how to leverage debt against assets. He made me work in the archives of the city library, not because we needed the money, but because he wanted me to understand the history of the land. He wanted me to know who owned what before they even put a sign up. And then I met Julian. My father saw through him instantly. The first time I brought Julian home for dinner, he was driving a leased BMW and wearing a fake Armani watch. He talked about disruption and synergy and how he was going to be the next Elon Musk. My father sat there eating his collard greens, nodding politely. After Julian left, my father looked at me with sad eyes. "He is a hungry ghost, Simone," my father said. "He is empty inside. He will eat until there is nothing left of you, and he will still be starving." I did not listen. I was young. I thought I could save him. I thought my love was enough to fill that emptiness. I married Julian against my father's advice, and for 5 years I played the role of the struggling wife. I hid my knowledge. I dimmed my light so Julian could shine. I lived in the shadow of his ego, terrified that if he knew the truth about my family, he would stop loving me and start loving the bank account. Turns out he never loved me anyway. 3 days ago, right after my father passed, I was summoned to the office of the Washington Legacy Trust. Mr. Henderson, the executor, sat at the head of a long oak table. The room smelled of old paper and serious money. "Simone," Mr. Henderson said, pushing a thick leather binder toward me. "Your father loved you very much. He built this entire empire for you. The commercial buildings, the residential towers, the parking structures, the diversified stock portfolio. It is all yours. The total valuation as of this morning is just over $100 million. I gasped. I knew my father was comfortable. I did not know he was a tycoon. But Mr. Henderson held up a hand. "There is a condition." He flipped the binder open to a page marked with a red tab. "Your father knew his health was failing. He also knew your marriage was failing. He watched Julian drain you financially and emotionally for years. He could not intervene while he was alive because he respected your free will. But he refused to let his life's work fall into the hands of a man he considered a parasite." Mr. Henderson pointed to the clause. "The beneficiary, Simone Washington, shall only inherit the assets of the Washington Legacy Trust upon the legal termination of her marriage to Julian Vance. As long as she remains legally wed to Mr. Vance, the assets shall remain in a blind trust managed by the board with no distributions allowed." I stared at the words. My father had reached out from the grave to protect me. He knew I would never leave Julian on my own. I was too loyal. I was too stubborn. So he gave me a choice. I could stay married to a man who treated me like garbage and live in poverty, or I could divorce him and become one of the most powerful women in Chicago. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the permission. My father was telling me it was okay to let go. He was telling me that I was worth more than a struggle love. That was why I signed the papers at the funeral. When Julian slammed that envelope on the table next to the coleslaw, he thought he was bullying me. He thought he was forcing my hand. He had no idea he was actually handing me the key to my inheritance. I needed that divorce decree. I needed it signed. I needed it filed. And I needed it to be uncontested so that Julian could not come back later and claim a stake in the trust. By forcing me to sign a waiver of all assets, by making me agree to walk away with nothing, Julian had inadvertently fulfilled the strictest requirements of my father's will. He had legally severed himself from the fortune he was so desperate to find. I walked over to the desk in the hotel room. I opened the folder Mr. Henderson had given me earlier that afternoon. Inside was the finalized divorce filing stamped by the court clerk. It was done. I was legally single. I was also legally the owner of the Nexus Tower. I pulled out the rent roll for the tower. I ran my finger down the list of tenants until I found it. Floor 14, Vance Tech Solutions. Monthly rent $22,000. Status, 60 days, past due. My father had been lenient. He had let Julian slide on the rent because he didn't want to cause conflict in my marriage. He had been subsidizing Julian's company silently for months. Julian thought he was a genius negotiating with a tough landlord. He didn't know the landlord was his father-in-law who was quietly throwing his invoices in the trash. But the landlord was not my father anymore. I picked up my phone. I dialed the front desk. "This is Ms. Washington in the presidential suite." "Yes, Ms. Washington. How can we help you?" "I need a courier for tomorrow morning. Early. I have a package that needs to be delivered to the Nexus Tower." "Certainly. What is in the package?" "Just a letter," I said, my finger tracing the eviction notice on the desk. "A very important letter." I hung up. I walked back to the bathroom and turned on the tap, adding more hot water to the tub. I watched the steam rise. Julian had called me an archivist. He meant it as an insult. He thought it meant I was boring. He thought it meant I lived in the past. But he forgot what archivists actually do. We keep the receipts, we document everything. We know where the bodies are buried, and we know who holds the deed to the graveyard. My father played the long game. He wore the mask of a poor preacher for 30 years so that I could learn the difference between real value and fool's gold. He taught me that silence is power. Julian was loud. He was flashy. He was glitter. I was the diamond. And tomorrow morning, when he walked into his office, he was going to find out that the ground he stood on was not solid rock. It was a trap door, and I was the one holding the lever. I slipped off the robe and stepped into the water. It was hot enough to burn, but I didn't flinch. I had been through the fire already. Now it was time to watch him burn. The librarian was checking out. The heiress was checking in. And the first item on my agenda was cleaning house. The champagne cork popped with a sound that echoed like a gunshot through the open-plan office of Vance Tech Solutions. Foam spilled over the neck of the bottle, dripping onto the expensive carpet that had not been cleaned in months. Julian held the bottle high like a trophy, his face flushed with alcohol and victory. To freedom, he shouted, his voice booming off the glass walls. A cheer went up from the 20 or so employees gathered around him. They were mostly young men, fresh out of college, guys who worshipped Julian because he drove a Tesla and talked about disrupting the industry. They did not know that the payroll checks for this month were currently unfunded. They did not know that the servers they were coding on were leased on credit that had just run out. Chloe was hanging off Julian's arm, giggling and holding a plastic flute of cheap sparkling wine. She looked at him with adoration, the kind of look that fades the moment the credit card gets declined. "Babe, you are so bad," she cooed, running a hand through his hair. "I cannot believe you actually did it. You are finally free." Julian poured more wine, spilling half of it on the desk. "I did it for us, baby," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I cut the dead weight. Simone was an anchor. She was holding this company back. She was holding me back. But now the sky is the limit. We are going to the moon, boys." Another cheer erupted. Music was blaring from the surround sound speakers, a heavy bass-heavy track that vibrated the floorboards. The office felt electric. It felt invincible. And then the world ended. It did not happen with a bang. It happened with a click. 1 second the lights were blazing and the music was thumping. The next second, total darkness. The music cut out instantly, leaving a ringing silence in the room. The overhead LED panels went black. The monitors on the desks flickered and died. The only light came from the red glow of the emergency exit signs, casting long, demonic shadows across the room. "What the hell?" Julian yelled, his voice cracking. "Who turned off the lights?" A murmur of confusion rippled through the staff. Someone turned on a phone flashlight, cutting a beam through the dusty air. "It is a blackout," one of the developers said. "The whole block must be out." "No," Julian snapped. "Look out the window, you idiot." We all looked. Across the street, the other buildings were blazing with light. The street lamps below were on. The traffic lights were working. The darkness was localized. It was specific. It was personal. Then came the sound that terrifies every tech CEO, the silence of the server room. Usually there was a low hum, a constant vibration of cooling fans and processing units that meant the product was live. Now there was nothing. "The servers," Julian whispered, his face going pale in the flashlight beam. "Why are the servers down? The battery backup should have kicked in." He scrambled toward the server room, stumbling over a chair in the dark. He threw the door open. The racks were dark. The status lights were off. They cut the power remotely. The lead engineer said, his voice trembling, "This wasn't a grid failure, boss. This was a hard kill." Someone pulled the plug on the main breaker and locked out the backups. Julian spun around, his eyes wild. "Who did this?" he screamed. "Call the building manager. Call Ray. Tell him I will sue him into oblivion if the power is not back on in 5 minutes. We have clients trying to log in. We are losing data." Chloe was standing by the window, holding her phone up, trying to get a signal. "My Wi-Fi is down," she whined. "I cannot post my story." Julian ignored her. He was punching numbers into his phone. He held it to his ear, pacing back and forth in the red light of the emergency sign. "Pick up, Ray! Pick up!" he hissed. But Ray did not pick up. Instead, a loud mechanical buzzing sound came from the front entrance. It was the service elevator. The doors slid open with a heavy grinding noise. A man stepped out. He was not Ray. He was wearing a dark gray uniform with no logo. He held a clipboard in one hand and a high-powered flashlight in the other. He shone the light directly into Julian's face, blinding him. "Mr. Vance," the man asked, his voice flat and emotionless. "Get that light out of my face," Julian shouted, shielding his eyes. "Who are you? Where is Ray? Turn the power back on right now or I will call the police." The man did not move. He did not lower the light. "Ray has been reassigned," the man said. "I am the new asset manager for the Washington Legacy Group." Julian blinked. "The what group?" "I do not care who you are. This is a violation of my lease. I have a contract." The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick white envelope. He stepped forward and pressed it against Julian's chest. "You had a contract," the man corrected him. "That contract expired 48 hours ago. The grace period ended at 5 p.m. today." Julian snatched the envelope. He tore it open, his hands shaking. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. He moved it under the flashlight beam, squinting to read the text. "Notice of lease termination and eviction. Tenant Vance Tech Solutions. Reason non-payment of rent. 60 days. Expiration of lease term. Action immediate vacation of premises required." Julian laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. "This is a joke," he said, looking around at his terrified employees. "This is a mistake. I spoke to the owner last week, Reverend Washington. He told me not to worry about the rent. He said we were family." The asset manager lowered the flashlight slightly, revealing a face made of stone. "Reverend Washington is deceased," the man said. "The ownership of this building has transferred to the trust. The trust does not have family members, Mr. Vance. It has tenants. And you are a delinquent tenant." Julian crumpled the paper in his fist. "You cannot do this," he spat. "I have rights, squatters' rights, tenant protection laws. You cannot just cut the power. I have a business to run." The man checked his watch. "You have 48 hours to remove your personal effects," he said, calm as a gravedigger. "Any equipment, furniture, or intellectual property remaining on the premises after that time will be seized to cover the outstanding debt of $44,000. The locks will be changed on Friday at noon." "Good evening, Mr. Vance." The man turned and walked back to the elevator. The doors closed, leaving Julian standing in the dark with his staff staring at him. "Fix this, Julian," the lead engineer pleaded. "We have code on those local drives that isn't backed up to the cloud yet. If we lose power for more than a few hours, the data corruption could be permanent." Julian threw the champagne bottle against the wall. It shattered, sending glass shards flying into the darkness. "Shut up!" he screamed. "Everyone just shut up!" He pulled out his phone again. He dialed a number he knew by heart. The number of his father-in-law. The number of the man he had secretly despised but publicly used for 5 years. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. Then a robotic voice answered. "The subscriber you have dialed is deceased. This line has been disconnected." Julian lowered the phone slowly. A strange, twisted smile began to spread across his face in the red light. "He is dead," he whispered. "He is really dead." Chloe grabbed his arm. "Babe, what does that mean?" she asked, terrified. "Are we homeless?" Julian looked at her, and then he looked at the ceiling as if trying to see through the concrete to the penthouse above. "No," he said, his voice gaining strength. "We are not homeless. We are geniuses." He turned to his staff, his charisma switching back on like a backup generator. "Listen to me, everyone. This is just a glitch, a bureaucratic error. The old man died, and the bank computers are auto-firing these notices. There is no new owner. But the guy said the trust—" One of the interns stammered. "The trust is a myth." Julian lied smoothly. The old man didn't have a trust. He had a daughter. "Simone." He said her name with a sneer. "Simone is the heir," he explained, pacing the room. "And Simone is an idiot. She doesn't know this building exists. She thinks her daddy was a poor preacher. She probably thinks this office is rented from some big corporation. She doesn't know she owns the mortgage." He stopped in the center of the room, spreading his arms wide. "Do you understand what that means?" he asked. "It means the cockpit is empty. There is nobody flying the plane. The old man is dead, and the daughter is too stupid to check the instrument panel." He grabbed the eviction notice and ripped it in half. "We are not leaving," he declared. "We are staying. We are going to squat. By the time Simone figures out how to probate the will, we will be a billion-dollar company. We will buy the building with petty cash." "But the power," the engineer asked. Julian smirked. "I know where the breaker box is in the basement. I have the master key the old man gave me years ago. I will go down there and turn it back on myself. Nobody is going to stop me. I am the husband of the heir. Technically, I own this place." He grabbed Chloe and pulled her close, kissing her hard. "Do not worry, baby," he whispered. "We are going to steal this building right out from under her nose. She is too busy crying over her divorce to notice she is a landlord." He did not know that 20 floors up in a hotel suite I was listening to every word. The new asset manager had left a small bug on the underside of the reception desk. I took off my headphones and took a sip of my wine. "Go ahead, Julian," I whispered to the empty room. "Go to the basement, break the lock, tamper with the electrical grid. That is a felony." He thought he was being clever. He thought he was seizing an opportunity. In reality, he was just adding criminal charges to the lawsuit I was about to drop on his head. The lobby of the Ritz-Carlton was a cathedral of marble and gold leaf. Soft jazz played from invisible speakers, and the air smelled of lilies and money. I was sitting in a high-backed velvet armchair in the corner of the lounge, concealed by a large potted palm. I was wearing a simple gray tracksuit and running shoes. No makeup. My hair pulled back in a ponytail. I looked comfortable. I looked like I belonged. But to Julian and Ashley, who had just burst through the revolving doors, I probably looked like the help. They spotted me instantly. It wasn't hard. I had enabled the Find My Friend's location on my old phone for 1 hour just to lure them here. They marched across the lobby, looking out of place in their flashy clothes. Julian looked manic. His eyes were bloodshot from a sleepless night in the dark office. Ashley looked furious, clutching her designer bag like a weapon. They stopped in front of my chair. Ashley looked me up and down, her lip curling in disgust. "Look at her," she hissed to Julian, "sitting there like she is on break. I told you she was working here. Housekeeping probably, or maybe laundry." She kicked the leg of my chair. "Hey, Cinderella," she snapped. "Break time is over. We need to talk." I looked up slowly. I did not stand. I did not flinch. "Hello, Julian." "Hello, Ashley. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Julian pulled up a chair and straddled it, sitting backwards to look cool. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale coffee and desperation. "Cut the act, Simone," he said. "We know you are struggling. We tracked your phone here. It is pathetic, really. My father-in-law dies, and 2 days later you are scrubbing toilets for minimum wage at a hotel." I took a sip of my sparkling water. "It is honest work, Julian," I said, keeping my face neutral. "Unlike some people, I pay my bills." Julian winced. The jab landed. "Look," he said, lowering his voice, "I am not here to fight. I am here to help you. Again." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He placed it on the low table between us. "I know about the insurance money," he said. "Steinberg told me you are stalling. You want to keep the 50 grand. I get it. You are broke." He uncapped a pen. "So here's the deal. I will let you keep the insurance money. All of it. I will tell the lawyers to drop the claim." I raised an eyebrow. "That is very generous of you, Julian." "Why?" "Because I need a favor," he said, writing quickly on the check. "There is a bureaucratic issue with the office building. The lease is in a weird state because your dad died. The bank needs a signature from the next of kin to verify that there are no outstanding claims on the property management." He tore the check out and slid it toward me. It was made out for $10,000. $10,000, I read aloud. "That is a bonus," he said, smiling his shark smile. "Just for signing a simple waiver. It basically says you have no interest in the management of the Nexus Tower, and that you authorize Vance Tech Solutions to continue operations as the primary tenant." I looked at the waiver he placed next to the check. It was poorly drafted, probably something he wrote himself. But the intent was clear. He wanted me to sign away my right to evict him. He wanted to trick me into acknowledging his tenancy so he could use it against the eviction notice. Ashley leaned in, her eyes greedy. "Take the money, Simone," she urged. 10 grand is like a year's salary for a maid. You can get your own apartment. You can stop embarrassing us by working here." I reached into my pocket and quietly tapped the record button on my phone. "Let me get this straight," I said, speaking clearly for the microphone. "You want me to sign a document stating that I have no claim to the building. You want me to waive my rights as the heir." Julian laughed, waving his hand dismissively. "You don't have rights, Simone. The building is owned by some shell corporation. This is just a formality to keep the power on. You are just signing as the daughter to say, 'I don't care.' And honestly, do you care? It is just a boring office building." I picked up the check, I looked at it, and this $10,000 I asked, "This is the price of my signature. Consider it a severance package," Julian said. "A final gift. Take it, Simone. Sign the paper. Walk away rich." I looked at Ashley. "And you, Ashley. You think I should take this?" Ashley rolled her eyes. "Obviously. Unless you want to be cleaning rich people's toilets for the rest of your life. Sign the paper, loser." I put the check down. I did not sign the paper. I looked Julian dead in the eye. "You are sure about this, Julian?" I asked. "You are sure you want to divorce me? You are sure you want total separation of assets? You are sure you want nothing to do with me or my family ever again?" Julian sighed, exasperated. "My God, Simone, how many times do I have to say it? Yes, I want you gone. I want your debt gone. I want your family drama gone. I want to be free." I leaned forward. "Do you have any regrets, Julian? Any at all?" He looked at me. He looked at the woman who had washed his clothes, cooked his meals, and paid his bills for 5 years. He looked at the woman who was currently offering him a lifeline he was too arrogant to see. He sneered. "Yes," he said, cold as ice. "My only regret is that I didn't leave you sooner. I wasted 5 years on a bad investment." The words hung in the air. The recording was perfect. He had admitted to coercion, he had admitted to the divorce intent, and he had admitted that he viewed our marriage solely as a financial transaction. I stood up. "Okay, Julian," I said. I picked up the check, and I ripped it into 4 pieces. Ashley gasped. "You idiot!" she shrieked. "That was $10,000. I dropped the confetti of paper onto the table. "I do not need your money, Julian," I said, looking down at him. "And I do not need your permission to survive." I turned to walk away. "Wait," Julian called out, standing up. "You didn't sign the waiver. The power is still out, Simone. You have to sign it." I stopped and looked back over my shoulder. "I think you should go back to the office, Julian," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I think you are going to find that the power isn't the only thing that has been cut." "What does that mean?" he demanded, stepping toward me. "It means the maid is done cleaning up your mess," I said. I signaled to the concierge who was watching from the desk. He nodded and picked up the phone, probably to call security, to escort the guests out. I walked toward the elevators. Not the service elevators, the guest elevators. I swiped my black card to call the Penthouse Express. Julian watched me, his mouth hanging open. "Where are you going?" he shouted. "The service entrance is that way." I stepped into the elevator and turned around to face them as the doors began to close. "I am going home, Julian," I said. "To the penthouse. My penthouse." The last thing I saw before the doors slid shut was the look of absolute confusion on his face. He was trying to do the math. He was trying to figure out how a maid had a key to the penthouse. He didn't know that the math was about to crush him. The elevator rocketed upward. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from adrenaline. I had the recording. I had the confession. I had the eviction notice. It was time to introduce Julian to the real owner of the Nexus Tower. It was time for the reveal. The fluorescent lights of the Cook County Courthouse hummed with a low headache-inducing vibration. It was the sound of broken promises and expensive arguments. I sat on a hard wooden bench outside courtroom 4B, smoothing the fabric of my dress. Today, I was not wearing the gray library cardigans Julian despised. I was wearing a structured black sheath dress that cost more than his car payments. I wore the Louboutins Ashley had tried to steal, the ones I had recovered from her closet this morning with the help of the hotel security team. But Julian did not notice my shoes. He did not notice my dress. He did not even notice me. He was standing 10 feet away, leaning against the wall, thumbing away on his phone. He was smiling. A smug, self-satisfied smile that told me he was texting Chloe. He probably told her it was almost over. He probably told her to chill the champagne because in less than an hour he would be a free man. He looked at me only once. His eyes slid over me like I was a piece of furniture in a waiting room. He saw a woman who had lost her father, lost her home, and was about to lose her husband. He saw a victim. Mr. Steinberg, his overpriced lawyer, waddled up to him. He was a short man with a comb-over and a suit that strained at the buttons. "Ready for the victory lap, Julian, mister?" Steinberg asked loud enough for me to hear. Julian slipped his phone into his pocket. "I was born ready. Let us get this over with. I have a company to run." He checked his watch. He was still obsessed with time. He thought he was rushing back to save his servers to fight the eviction notice he thought was a mistake. He had no idea that the eviction notice was the least of his problems. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, sat beside me. He was the opposite of Steinberg. Tall, quiet, and composed. He had been my father's friend for 30 years. He knew where every skeleton was buried, and he knew exactly which key opened the crypt. He had a thick leather briefcase on his lap. Inside that briefcase was not just a divorce defense, it was a nuclear weapon. "Ready?" Simone Mr. Henderson asked softly. I looked at the double doors of the courtroom. "I have been ready for 5 years," I whispered. The bailiff opened the doors. "Case number 4492, Vance versus Vance." We walked in. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Just a judge's bench, 2 tables, and a few rows of empty seats. It smelled of floor wax and old decisions. Judge Patterson was a stern woman, with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked tired. She looked like she had seen enough lying husbands to last a lifetime. Julian and Steinberg took the table on the right. They sat down with a flourish. Julian leaned back in his chair, spreading his arms across the backrest. He looked like he was at a board meeting he controlled. Mr. Henderson and I took the table on the left. I sat with my back straight, hands folded on the table. Judge Patterson adjusted her glasses and looked down at the file. "We are here for an uncontested dissolution of marriage," she stated, her voice flat. "I have a petition filed by Mr. Julian Vance and a waiver of service signed by Mrs. Simone Vance. I see here that there is a pre-negotiated settlement agreement regarding the division of assets, Mr." Steinberg stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Yes, Your Honor. My client, Mr. Vance, has been incredibly generous. Despite Mrs. Vance's lack of financial contribution to the marriage, he has agreed to a walk-away settlement. He is asking for 0 alimony. He is asking for 0 reimbursement for the years he supported her. In exchange, he simply asks for a clean break. Total separation of assets and liabilities." The judge looked at Julian. "Mr. Vance, is that correct? You are waiving all claims to any spousal support." Julian stood up. He flashed his charming startup CEO smile, the one he used on investors. "Absolutely, Your Honor. I just want to move on. I am a builder. I look forward. I do not want anything from her. I just want what is mine. My company, my car, my future." Judge Patterson nodded. She turned her gaze to me. "And Mrs. Vance, I see here that you are also waiving any claim to Mr. Vance's business assets and future earnings. You understand that once this gavel comes down, you cannot come back and ask for a share of his company, even if it becomes worth billions." I stood up. My legs felt strong. "I understand, Your Honor," I said clearly. "I do not want his company. I do not want his money. I want exactly what he wants. A complete and total severance of financial ties." Steinberg smirked. He leaned over and whispered something to Julian. Julian chuckled. They thought I was surrendering. They thought I was foolishly walking away from a potential gold mine because I was too proud to fight. Judge Patterson flipped through the pages. "I see a specific clause here regarding the estate of the late Reverend Marcus Washington." Clause 9. The husband waives any and all interest in the estate of the wife's father, including any assets or debts associated with said estate. She looked over her glasses at Julian. "Mr. Vance, you are aware that inheritance laws can be complex. By signing this, you are permanently barring yourself from any claim to your late father-in-law's property. Even if it turns out there are undisclosed assets, you will have no standing to claim them. Are you sure you want to include this?" Julian did not hesitate. He practically jumped at the microphone. "I am 100% sure, Your Honor. The estate is complicated. There are significant debts. I want to protect my business from those liabilities. I want no part of the Washington estate. None." He emphasized the word none like he was dodging a bullet. He was so terrified of inheriting my father's imaginary debts that he was sprinting away from the fortune. "Very well," Judge Patterson said. She picked up her pen. "Since both parties are in agreement and there are no children involved, I see no reason to delay. The court finds the marriage irretrievably broken. The settlement agreement is ratified and incorporated into the judgment." She looked at us one last time. "Good luck to both of you." She raised the gavel. I held my breath. This was it. The moment my father had orchestrated from beyond the grave. The moment of transition. Bang! The sound of the gavel hitting the wood block was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It echoed through the room like a church bell. "Divorce granted," Judge Patterson said, closing the file. Julian pumped his fist in the air. He turned to Steinberg and high-fived him. "Yes," he hissed. "Free. Finally free." He turned to me. His face was glowing with triumph. "Goodbye, Simone," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Try not to spend that library paycheck all in one place. If you need a reference for a rental application, do not call me." He turned to grab his briefcase. He was already mentally halfway to the door. He was already thinking about the celebratory dinner with Chloe. Mr. Henderson stood up. "Your Honor." His voice was deep and commanding. It stopped Julian in his tracks. Judge Patterson, who had started to stand, paused. "Mr. Henderson," she asked, "the judgment has been rendered. Is there a problem?" "No problem, Your Honor," Mr. Henderson said, opening his leather briefcase. "In fact, the judgment was the prerequisite for the matter I must now address." Julian rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on," he groaned. "What now? She wants the toaster. She wants the blender. Give her whatever she wants, Steinberg. Just get me out of here." Mr. Henderson ignored him. He pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. It had a wax seal on the front. "Your Honor, I am the executor of the estate of the late Reverend Marcus Washington. I am also the trustee of the Washington Legacy Trust." Steinberg frowned. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevancy. Mr. Vance just waived all claims to that estate. This has nothing to do with us." "On the contrary," Mr. Henderson said, his eyes locking onto Julian's face. "It has everything to do with the fact that as of 30 seconds ago, Miss Simone Washington is now a single woman." He walked up to the bench and handed the document to the judge. "Reverend Washington's last will and testament contained a conditional trigger clause, Your Honor. It is what we in the estate planning business call a protection from predatory marriage clause." Julian froze. The color began to drain from his face. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew he didn't like the word predatory. Mr. Henderson continued, his voice ringing with authority. "The clause states that the primary beneficiary, Simone Washington, shall not inherit the bulk of the estate so long as she is married to Mr. Julian Vance." The Reverend was quite specific. He believed that Mr. Vance was financial dead weight. Steinberg sputtered. "I object. This is slander. It is a legal document," Mr. Henderson countered. He pointed to the blue folder. "However, the clause further states that upon the legal dissolution of said marriage, the assets are to be immediately released from the blind trust and transferred to the sole ownership of Ms. Simone Washington." Judge Patterson opened the document. Her eyebrows shot up. She scanned the pages, her eyes widening with every line. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice losing its flatness. "Are these figures accurate?" "They are current as of this morning, Your Honor," Mr. Henderson replied. Judge Patterson looked at me. Then she looked at Julian. A look of pure disbelief. "Mr. Vance," she said, "it appears that by finalizing this divorce you have just triggered the release of an estate valued at approximately $112 million. The room went silent. Dead silent. The kind of silence where you can hear a heartbreak. Julian blinked. Once, twice, what he whispered. $112 million, Judge Patterson repeated. "It includes a diversified portfolio of commercial real estate, including," she squinted at the list, "the Nexus Tower, the West Loop Marina, and the Washington Heights complex." Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish that had been thrown onto the dock. He looked at Steinberg. Steinberg looked like he was about to vomit. "Nexus Tower." Julian choked out. That is where my office is." "Correct," Mr. Henderson said, pleasant as could be. "And as of the moment that gavel dropped, Ms. Washington became the sole owner of that building. Which brings me to my next point." Mr. Henderson pulled another paper from his briefcase. "Since Mr. Vance has so graciously waived all claims to the estate, and since he insisted on a total separation of assets, he has no claim to the marital home, which was also titled under the trust." Mr. Henderson turned to Julian. "Mr. Vance, you are currently trespassing in Ms. Washington's penthouse. Furthermore, your company is currently occupying the 14th floor of Ms. Washington's building without a valid lease." Julian grabbed the table to steady himself. His knees were buckling. "No," he stammered. "No, that is a lie. The old man was broke. He was a pastor. He drove a Buick. He was a genius," Mr. Henderson corrected him. "And he knew exactly what you were. That is why he locked the money away. He knew you would eventually leave Simone because you are greedy. He knew you would sign any waiver just to get away from her debt. He banked on your arrogance, Mr. Vance, and you did not disappoint him." Julian looked at me. His eyes were wide with horror. He was seeing me for the first time. Really seeing me. He wasn't seeing the librarian anymore. He was seeing the woman who held the deed to his life. "Simone," he gasped, reaching out a hand toward me. "Baby, wait, you didn't tell me." I took a step back. I looked at his hand, the hand that had thrown a divorce petition at me at a funeral. "I didn't have to tell you, Julian," I said, my voice cool and steady. "You said it yourself. You wanted a clean break. You wanted total separation. But that is $100 million, he shouted, his voice cracking. "That is marital property. I was married to you when the old man died. I am entitled to half." Steinberg jumped in, trying to salvage the disaster. "Your Honor, we move to vacate the judgment. My client was not fully informed of the assets. There was concealment. This is fraud." Judge Patterson slammed the gavel down again. Bang. "Motion denied," she barked. "Mr. Steinberg, your client stood right there 5 minutes ago and explicitly stated he wanted to waive all claims to the estate regardless of value. He called it a clean break. He insisted on it. You cannot vacate a judgment just because you realized you made a bad bet." She looked at Julian with zero sympathy. "You got exactly what you asked for, Mr. Vance. You are divorced. You are free of her debts. And consequently, you are free of her assets." Julian sank into his chair. He looked small. He looked broken. The arrogance was gone, vaporized by the magnitude of his loss. Mr. Henderson closed his briefcase. The snap of the latches was loud in the quiet room. "We will be sending over the final eviction notice by courier this afternoon," Mr. Henderson said to Steinberg. "We expect Mr. Vance to vacate the penthouse by 5 p.m. And regarding the office space," he looked at me, "what are your instructions regarding the tenant Vance Tech Solutions, Ms. Washington?" I looked at Julian. He was staring at the floor, shaking his head, muttering "no, no, no" over and over again. I checked my imaginary watch, just like Julian had done earlier. "He is behind on rent," I said. "Evict him." Julian looked up. There were tears in his eyes. Real tears this time. "Simone, please," he begged. "That company is my life." "No, Julian," I said, turning to walk away. "It was your life. Now it is just a tax write-off for me." I walked out of the courtroom. The sound of my heels clicking on the floor was the only sound in the world. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. A man who had traded a diamond for a plastic spoon. I pushed open the double doors and stepped into the hallway. The air tasted different out here. It tasted expensive. I took out my phone. I had one more call to make. The first call of my new life. I dialed the number for the architectural firm my father had always wanted to hire, but felt was too flashy. "Hello," I said when they answered. "This is Simone Washington. I would like to schedule a meeting. I am planning a renovation of the Nexus Tower. I want to turn the 14th floor into a shelter for victims of financial abuse." I smiled. "And I need it done immediately. The current tenant is leaving today." Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses and opened the blue folder with a deliberation that was almost cruel. The sound of the crisp paper turning was the only noise in the courtroom. It sounded like a guillotine blade being hoisted up. Julian was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white, his eyes darting back and forth between me and the lawyer. He knew something bad was coming, but his arrogance would not let him believe it was fatal. He still thought this was a negotiation. He still thought he could charm or bully his way out of it. "Your Honor," Mr. Henderson began, his voice filling the room with a deep, resonant baritone. "I will now read the inventory of the assets released from the Washington Blind Trust, effective immediately upon the dissolution of this marriage." He looked directly at Julian. Item 1, liquid assets held in diversified high-yield accounts. Cash on hand, $102,400,000. Julian let out a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. It sounded like he had been punched in the gut. His eyes bulged. $100 million. He had spent 5 years calling me a financial burden. He had spent 5 years complaining about the cost of groceries. He had spent 5 years trying to get funding for his startup, begging venture capitalists for a fraction of that amount. And the whole time he was sleeping next to a woman who could have bought his entire industry with a check. Item 2. Mr. Henderson continued ignoring Julian's distress. Real estate holdings. The portfolio includes 5 Class A commercial high-rise buildings in the downtown district, the West Loop Marina Complex, the Washington Heights Residential Tower, and the property located at 440 North Michigan Avenue, also known as the Nexus Tower. Julian slumped forward, his forehead hitting the table with a dull thud. The Nexus Tower. His headquarters, the building he strutted around in like a rooster. He had bragged to everyone that he was the king of that castle. Now he realized he was just a peasant living in the Queen's basement. But Mr. Henderson was not done. He had saved the sharpest knife for last. Item 3. Intellectual property. The trust holds the exclusive global patents and copyright for the core data compression algorithm known as the Titan Protocol. Julian's head snapped up. His face was gray. "No," he whispered. "That is impossible. That is my code. My company built that." Mr. Henderson shook his head slowly. "Incorrect, Mr. Vance. You built an interface. You built a shiny app wrapper. But the underlying code, the engine that actually makes your software work, was written by a developer named Marcus Washington in 1998. He patented it. He licensed it to shell companies. And when you started your company, you unknowingly built your entire platform on top of his intellectual property. You have been operating in violation of copyright for 3 years." Julian looked like he was going to be sick. His entire identity was built on being a tech genius. He told everyone he was a visionary. Now, the world was about to find out he was a fraud who stole code from his father-in-law. Ashley, who had been sitting in the gallery stunned into silence, suddenly erupted. She stood up, her face twisted and red. She looked like a cornered animal lashing out. "Liar!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Mr. Henderson. "You are a liar. This is a scam. That money is not hers." "Sit down, ma'am," the bailiff warned, stepping forward. "No, I will not sit down," Ashley shrieked. "This is fraud. Look at her. She is a librarian. She buys her clothes at Target. There is no way she has $100 million. This is a trick to steal Julian's company." She turned to the judge, her voice raising to a hysterical pitch. "Your Honor, you cannot allow this." They were married. They were married when her father died. That means Julian is entitled to half. It is community property. He is the husband. He supported her. He deserves $50 million. You have to give it to him. Julian seemed to wake up at her words. A flicker of hope returned to his eyes. He grabbed Steinberg's arm. "She is right," he stammered, desperate. "She is right. I was the husband. I was there. I am entitled to a share. California is a community property state. I mean Illinois. Whatever the law is, I want my half." Steinberg looked at him with pity. He shook his head. "Julian, stop. No." Julian shouted, standing up. "I will not stop. That is my money. I earned it. I put up with her for 5 years. I put up with her boring family and her cheap lifestyle. I deserve compensation." Mr. Henderson waited for them to finish. He did not shout. He did not get angry. He simply reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not a fancy legal document bound in blue. It was a simple yellow piece of paper. It had a coffee stain on the corner. I recognized it instantly. It was the paper from the funeral. "Your Honor," Mr. Henderson said, holding the paper up. "Mr. Vance seems to be suffering from memory loss. Perhaps I can refresh his recollection." He walked over to the witness stand and placed the paper in front of Julian. "Do you recognize this signature, Mr. Vance?" Julian looked down. He stared at his own handwriting, the bold, arrogant loops of his signature. Mr. Henderson began to read aloud, reciting the words that Julian had forced me to sign just 48 hours ago. "This is the petition for simplified dissolution of marriage, drafted by Mr. Julian Vance. Specifically, let us look at the addendum he insisted on including. Clause number 3. The room was silent. Ashley had stopped screaming. Julian was not breathing. Clause 3. Mr. Henderson read, In exchange for the wife waiving any claim to the husband's business known as Vance Tech Solutions, the husband hereby irrevocably waives controls and releases any and all claims to the estate of the wife's father, Reverend Marcus Washington. The husband acknowledges that he wants a complete financial separation and accepts that he shall receive 0 assets from said estate, regardless of its future valuation. Mr. Henderson paused, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. Regardless of its future valuation, he repeated. He looked at Julian. You wrote this clause, Julian. You wrote it because you thought the estate was a pile of debt. You thought you were being clever. You thought you were dodging a bullet. You told Simone at the funeral that you wanted a clean break. You told her she had nothing you wanted. Julian was shaking. His hands were gripping the table so hard his fingernails were digging into the wood. I didn't know, he whispered, his voice breaking. I didn't know it was millions. I thought it was just a house. I thought it was just debt. It is not fair. Fair, Mr. Henderson asked, his voice sharpening. You served your wife divorce papers over her father's casket. You brought your mistress to the funeral repast. You threw your wife's clothes in garbage bags. And you want to talk about fair? He turned to the judge. Your Honor, Mr. Vance signed this document of his own free will. He was not under duress. In fact, he was the one applying the duress. He coerced his grieving wife to sign it because he wanted to secure his freedom to be with his mistress. He traded his wife's inheritance for his own selfishness. Judge Patterson looked at the yellow paper. She looked at the blue document. Then she looked at Julian. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. The law is not a casino. You do not get to take your bet back just because you see the other player's cards. You bet against your wife. You bet that she was worthless. You bet that her family was worthless. She leaned forward. You lost. She picked up the gavel one last time. The court upholds the waiver. Mr. Vance has no claim to the Washington estate. The assets are solely the property of Ms. Simone Washington. Julian fell back into his chair. It wasn't a sit. It was a collapse. His legs just stopped working. He stared at the ceiling, his mouth open, his eyes empty. $100 million. He had signed away $100 million to save himself from paying a few thousand in imaginary debts. He had signed away an empire because he was too busy chasing a skirt. Ashley burst into tears, ugly, loud sobbing. She realized that the money she had been screaming for was gone forever. She realized that her brother-in-law was not a genius. He was the biggest fool in Chicago. I stood up. I picked up my purse. I looked at Julian. He looked back at me. His eyes were pleading. He looked like a dog that had been kicked. Simone, he rasped. We can fix this. We can talk. I still love you. I looked at him. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just the cool indifference of a stranger. You do not love me, Julian, I said softly. You love money, and now you have neither. I turned to Mr. Henderson. Shall we go? I asked. I have a building to inspect. We walked out of the courtroom, leaving the chaos behind us. I heard Steinberg yelling at Julian. I heard Ashley wailing, but all I felt was the weight of the future settling on my shoulders. And it felt light. It felt like freedom. Julian had signed his own death warrant, and I had handed him the pen. The envelope that arrived at the glass doors of Vance Tech Solutions was not thick or heavy. It was a single sheet of paper that weighed less than a feather, but it hit the desk with the force of a wrecking ball. Julian was sitting in his office, trying to reassure his staff that the power outage from 2 days ago was just a glitch. He was lying. He was good at lying. But paper does not lie. The courier had handed it to him with a pitying look. Julian ripped it open. It was the new commercial lease agreement from the Washington Legacy Trust. He scanned the numbers, and his face went the color of ash. The rent had been adjusted to market value, plus a penalty premium for high-risk tenants. $22,000 a month had become $88,000 a month, due immediately, retroactive to the beginning of the quarter. Julian dropped the paper. He could not pay that. He could not even pay the old rent. He grabbed his phone to call his investors, but his hands were shaking so bad he dropped it. He looked out the window. Down on the street, he saw a flatbed tow truck backing into the reserved parking spot. The spot marked CEO. The driver hopped out wearing a vest with the Trust logo. He was hooking chains onto the front axle of the black Mercedes S-Class. No, Julian screamed. He scrambled out of his chair, knocking over his coffee. He ran through the office past his confused employees who were whispering about the new lease memo that had just hit their inboxes. He burst out of the elevators and sprinted across the lobby. "Hey!" he shouted, running onto the sidewalk. "Get away from my car! That is my car!" The tow truck driver didn't even look up. He just kept ratcheting the chains tight. "Check the VIN number, buddy," the driver said calmly. "This vehicle is registered to the Washington estate. I have a repo order signed by the owner. Ms. Simone Washington." Julian grabbed the door handle. It was locked. He patted his pockets for the key fob, but when he pressed the unlock button, the car did not chirp. It sat there dead and heavy, a brick on wheels. "You cannot do this!" Julian yelled, banging his fist on the window. "I have rights. I have a lease. You have nothing," the driver said, walking to the cab of the truck. "You waived your rights. Read the court order." Julian turned around looking for help. He saw Chloe standing by the revolving doors. She was holding a box of her things. She had seen the lease agreement upstairs. She had seen the panic in the eyes of the accounting department, and now she was watching her boyfriend lose his status symbol on a public street. Julian gasped, running over to her. "Baby, tell him. Tell him it is a mistake. We will call Steinberg. We will sue them." Chloe took a step back. She looked at Julian with eyes that were completely empty. There was no love there. There was no admiration. There was only calculation, and the math was no longer working in her favor. "Uber is here," she said, looking at her phone. "What?" Julian asked. "You are leaving. Now. I need you, Chloe. We are a team." Chloe laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "We were a team when you were a CEO with a penthouse," she said. "Now you are a guy with a mountain of debt and no car. I do not date pedestrians, Julian. It is bad for my brand." She walked past him. She didn't even look back. She opened the door of the waiting Uber and slid inside. Julian watched the car pull away. He watched the tow truck drag his Mercedes onto the flatbed with a screech of metal on metal. He stood there on the sidewalk in his expensive suit that he could no longer afford to dry clean. His phone buzzed. It was a notification from the bank. "Insufficient funds. Your corporate credit card has been declined." He looked up at the building, the Nexus Tower. His name used to be on the directory. Now workers were already scraping the vinyl letters of Vance Tech Solutions off the glass. He was being erased. He had bet everything on his ability to outsmart a librarian. He had thought he was the shark in the water. He didn't realize until the water drained away that he was just a minnow flopping on the concrete. He walked back toward the lobby, but Ray, the security guard, stepped in front of him. Ray crossed his massive arms. "I cannot let you back in, Mr. Vance," Ray said, his voice deep and final. "But my stuff," Julian stammered. "My laptop, my coat." "We will box it up and leave it on the curb," Ray said. "The new owner has a strict policy, no trespassing." Julian slumped against the cold stone of the building exterior. He slid down until he was sitting on the pavement. People walked by, stepping around him like he was invisible. He put his head in his hands. He had signed the paper. He had signed the waiver. He had signed his own eviction. And the silence of the city was the loudest thing he had ever heard. 3 months later, the autumn wind in Chicago had turned sharp and biting, but inside the penthouse, it was warm. I stood by the window, looking out at the city that I now owned a significant piece of. The apartment looked different. I had removed the cold gray furniture Julian loved. I had filled the space with warm earth tones, soft velvet, and art from local black artists. It finally felt like a home. It felt like me. My phone rang. It was Ashley. I had not blocked her number because I enjoyed the occasional reminder of how far they had fallen. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message later while drinking tea. "Simone, please pick up." Ashley's voice sounded cracked and desperate. "Marcus kicked me out. He filed for divorce. He said I poisoned his relationship with the family. He said I cost him his brother and his inheritance. I have nowhere to go, Simone. I am staying at a Motel 6. please. I know I was hard on you, but we are family. Can you just loan me enough for a deposit on an apartment? I will pay you back." I deleted the message. I did not feel guilt. I felt closure. Ashley had spent years trying to break my marriage and belittle my worth. Now she was experiencing the reality she had wished upon me. She was learning that malice is an expensive hobby. I put on my coat, a tailored camel trench coat that commanded respect. I took the elevator down to the lobby. The doorman tipped his cap. "Good morning, Ms. Washington." "Good morning, Henry." I walked out to the waiting car. Not a Honda Civic, a chauffeured town car. We drove 2 blocks to the building formerly known as the Nexus Tower. The workers were just finishing the installation of the new sign above the entrance. The letters were cast in bronze, and they caught the morning light. The Washington Legacy Center. It was no longer just an office building. I had converted the 14th floor into an incubator for minority-owned businesses. I had turned the penthouse into a transition space for women escaping financial abuse. I was using my father's money to build the safety net he had provided for me. I walked into the lobby. The air felt lighter. The energy was different. People were smiling. I took the private elevator up to my office on the top floor. My assistant, a sharp young woman named David, was waiting with a stack of files. "Morning, Simone." David said, "We have a walk-in interview at 10. The agency sent him over for the entry-level data entry position. He says he has experience in the building." I sat down at my desk, the same desk my father used to sit at. "Send him in," I said. The door opened. Julian walked in. He looked 10 years older. His suit was ill-fitting and wrinkled, probably bought from a thrift store. His hair was thinning. The arrogance that used to radiate off him like heat waves was gone, replaced by a nervous twitch in his left eye. He was holding a resume with both hands like a shield. He stopped when he saw me. He dropped the resume. It fluttered to the floor, landing between us. "Simone," he whispered. "Hello, Julian," I said. "I heard you were looking for work." He looked around the office. He looked at the view. He looked at the nameplate on my desk. Simone Washington, CEO. I didn't know," he stammered. "The agency just said it was a tech support role, minimum wage. I need the money, Simone. I am living in a basement in Cicero. Chloe took everything." The bankruptcy court took the rest. He took a step forward, his hands shaking. "Please, Simone, I know the system's here. I built the network in this building. I can do the job. I will work hard. Just give me a chance. I will stay out of your way. I just need a paycheck." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had called me a burden, the man who had laughed when he threw me out of my own home, the man who had tried to steal my father's insurance money. I picked up his resume from the floor. I didn't even read it. I stood up and walked around the desk. I stood in front of him. I was wearing heels, so I was looking him right in the eye. "You built the network on stolen code, Julian," I said quietly. "You built your life on a stolen legacy, and you lost it all because you refused to read the fine print." I handed the resume back to him. "We are building something different here, Julian. We value integrity. We value loyalty, and most of all, we value competence." I walked to the door and opened it. "I am sorry, Mr. Vance," I said, my voice cold and professional, "but you are not a good fit for our culture. We do not hire people who lack the capacity to value what they have." "But Simone," he begged, tears welling in his eyes, "I have nowhere else to go." "Then I suggest you go to the library," I said. "They have free internet. You can search for jobs there. And if you are lucky, maybe you can find a book on how to start over from nothing. It is a lesson I learned 5 years ago. Now it is your turn." I closed the door. I went back to my desk. I opened the file for the new scholarship fund I was launching. I didn't watch him leave. I didn't need to. The past was behind a closed door. The future was sitting right in front of me, waiting to be written. And this time I was holding the pen. Simone's story is a masterclass in the art of strategic silence. In a world that constantly pressures women to perform, to prove their worth, and to show off their assets, Simone teaches us that true power does not need to announce itself. Julian made the fatal mistake of confusing net worth with self-worth. He looked at Simone's modest clothes and her quiet demeanor and saw a victim when he was actually looking at a vault. This narrative reveals a harsh truth about modern relationships. Some people are not looking for a partner. They are looking for a parasite host. Julian didn't love Simone. He loved what he thought he could extract from her. But Simone's father gave her the ultimate gift, not just the money, but the wisdom to use a poverty mask to filter out the gold diggers. The most powerful takeaway here is that you must never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake. Simone didn't scream, cry, or beg when Julian handed her the divorce papers. She didn't try to prove him wrong in the moment. She allowed him to sign his own financial death warrant because she knew that the ultimate revenge isn't noise, it's success. She shows us that walking away with your dignity is priceless, but walking away with the deed to the building is legendary. Never let a person who cannot afford your value convince you to lower your price. Have you ever held back the truth about your success just to see who would stay by your side when things look tough? Or have you ever been underestimated by someone who later regretted it when they saw you shine? Let us know your story in the comments below. And if you believe that a woman's silence can be louder than a man's shouting, hit that like button and subscribe. We have more stories of justice, revenge, and the sweet taste of victory coming your way. You won't want to miss the next one.